After looking at the bakes in the previous lesson, we noticed some projection errors. So what we're going to do in this lesson is set up a match by name bake and inspect our source assets just a bit better so we can understand how the baking is working within Painter. Here's our low poly asset in Maya. In our first lesson, I mentioned the head and legs texture set. So if I bring up the hypershade, you'll notice we have two materials, head and legs. These correspond to the texture sets that were found within Painter. So if I select objects with the material for the head, that's going to choose the upper portion of the mesh. And if I choose the legs material, that would choose the lower portion of the mesh. So if you wanted to have more texture sets to work with, you can just assign more materials to different parts of your mesh. Now let's set up our match by name bake. Basically what you want to do is split up your mesh into parts to minimize any overlapping. Traditionally, this is called exploding the mesh. In the previous lesson, we looked at the knee area and the clips. As you can see here, I've separated the thigh from the knee, and the knee joint is on a separate piece. Same with the thigh and front guard. And looking at the canister, this is a separate object, and so are all the clips. Now I've done this to the entire mesh, so looking at the top half, any parts of the mesh that are overlapping are now their own object. So that's the first step in creating a match by name bake. Next is the naming of these objects. Now it's extremely important that these have a suffix of _low on each of these parts. It's also important for you to remember what you name each of these parts, because when we look at our high poly model, it will also have a matching name with a suffix of _high. Now let's take a look at our high poly mesh within ZBrush. If you look at the subtool palette, we have all the corresponding high poly models that match our low poly model from Maya. The only difference is the suffix, which is now _high. What happens in Painter is it will go through each of the objects and look for its corresponding low counterpart and bake them in isolation from the rest of the mesh. One other aspect to note is the polypaint on the object. So if I enable polypaint on all my subtools, you can see that the mesh is colored. This is going to be used to bake our ID map within Painter. Essentially, what this is going to allow us to do is apply different materials to those different colors quickly within Painter. Now if you're doing your high poly model in a different 3D package, the color ID map will be baked using your material colors that you assign within the respective 3D package that you're using. Now that our meshes are set up for match by name baking, we can rebake our texture maps. So let's go ahead and hit Tab to bring our UI back. And I'll go and reopen the baking dialog. Now this time we can do a much higher quality bake. So I'll double the output size to 4K. And to enable the match by name bake, we'll switch from always to match by name. Finally, we'll up the anti-aliasing to 4x4. If you're following along, just be warned that this bake will take a few hours to complete, so we'll end the lesson here and come back in the next lesson where we'll dive further into the UI.